Listen-only mode.
Hello gang, this is Norm Hoffman. I know you're all muted right now, but I want to introduce Aaron Norton, who is the chair of the Training Development Implementation. He's arranged for today's webinar, which is going to be essential for you to understand. I know we went over this before, some of the other training, but this is going to be the most updated one. So I'm going to turn it all over to Aaron. You got it.
All right, welcome everyone. Well, before we get in here too much with things, I want to kind of take a pulse of who's in the room today, and I also want to give you a few instructions in case any of you haven't used GoToWebinar yet. Basically, as you use GoToWebinar, there's a rectangular GoToWebinar panel that you'll see on your screen. It's usually on the right-hand side of your screen. You can drag it if it's ever in the way of something. You can also click on, you'll see to the left of your panel, there's a little red arrow button that's pointing to the right. If you click on that, it'll actually shrink get rid of the rectangular panel and just leave the strip on the edge. And if you ever want to bring it back, you just click on that same arrow again. Now you're all going to be muted here, but at the same time, of course, I want to give you ample opportunity to interact and ask questions and things. So there are two different ways that you can do that. One way that you can do that is to raise your hand. There should be a way for you to raise your hand using the options there on your panel.
Muted. Unmuted.
When I'm able to do that anyway. Oh, can everybody hear me right now? Okay. So we'll be able to, if you raise your hand, I'll be able to unmute you and you can ask your question verbally. The other way to do this is that you can type a question into the questions box. So you'll see in your options there, it says questions. There's a plus sign to the left of it. If you click on that, it'll expand that part of the box and you can type a question in. So those are two different ways to interact with me as we go forward in the training here. So first thing I'm going to do is launch a poll. Polls are basically, you're going to see a question on your screen in a second here. It kind of helps me to take a pulse on who's in the room today. What you should see on your screen right now is which best describes you, and it gives you a few options here. One option is licensed counselor. The other one is LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist. You have the option of licensed clinical social worker, psychologist, or other. So I'm going to give you a moment here to select the option that best describes you so I know who's in the room today.
Aaron, I don't see that poll on my screen.
Okay, probably the reason you don't see it on your screen is that I think we have you technically as in presenter mode right now, so it may not show for you.
Okay, gotcha.
But it looks like it is showing for everybody else because 100% of our attendees have voted, so everyone has voted.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead then and launch the results. And what you should see on your screen is that 85% of you are licensed counselors, 8% LMFT, and 8% LCSW. So mostly counselors on today's webinar. I see that I have a question in the question screen. Angela, you say that I'm frozen with no sound. So Angela, let me know if you're still experiencing that. It looks like everybody else so far can see me and hear me okay. Angela won't, oh, she says no, not now, so she can hear me. All right, so we should be good then. So now I'm going to launch a second poll that gives me a sense of who's in the room today. How would you best describe your experience with writing forensic reports? First option is zero, zilch, nada. No experience at all with writing forensic reports. Second one is a little experience, or you can say a moderate amount of experience. I'd say more than most. Or finally, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tommy Black, which is, for those of you who know Tommy Black, he is a very experienced writer of these reports, and He's the guy who teaches our testing and assessment class. So if you select that option, you're saying, I write a lot of reports. I'll give you a moment to select the option that best fits for you. Okay, all of you have cast your vote, so I'll close this out and share our results here. Looks like 8% of you have had no experience, 46% a little, 8% moderate, 23% say more than most, and 15% are really, really experienced forensic report writers. So probably about more than half of you are saying you either have no experience or just a little experience. So hopefully this webinar will really help you out, because what we're going to be doing in this webinar is not only covering the oral exam, but also how you write the report to begin with prior to your oral exam. So we're going to cover both. Okay, one more polling question and then we'll jump into things. Which are you most interested in focusing on today? Two options: how to write an awesome report or how to nail the oral exam. You get to pick which of those two you are most interested in focusing on with today's webinar. Okay, we have 85% of you having voted so far, so I'll give you just a moment longer. Okay, I'll go ahead and close things out. 92% of you have cast a vote on this, and the results are 75% of you were interested in how to write an awesome report primarily, and 25% of you say that you're most interested in how to pass the oral exam. So that's good information for me to have. I might spend a little bit more time on the report than a little bit less time on the oral exam to make it most meaningful for you. Okay, so let's move right into our information here. We're obviously going to start with the sample report. Now, hopefully you all know about a resource called the CFMHE Candidate Training Folder. I have popped it up on my screen here. I don't know if you can see it right now or not. CFMHE Candidate Training Materials, because I'm opening it through Windows Explorer because I have it on Boxing. What it is it's a folder that we have on Box, which is the same thing as Dropbox. It's one of those online storage resources. And in this folder, we've got several different resources available to you. One of those is the most current edition of the sample oral examination report. And then we also have an outline of Word document entitled Oral Exam Report Outline. So everything that you're going to see today on the slides are 100% consistent with what you're going to see in this folder. And there's a link for the folder and a password for it. If you don't have that information, then just send me an email and I'll be sure and get you that login information. If you want to send the email to me, you would send it to aaron@integritycounseling.net. So that's my first name, AARON, at integritycounseling.net. And I'll show you that email address again towards the end of the webinar here. So the sample report, we're going to go through it section by section, but first I wanted to give you the bird's eye view of the report in the different sections. We got the title and type of the evaluation, the header, which is mostly your basic information, identifying information about the client, and the date that you did the evaluation and interview dates, your list of sources and collateral sources, your identifying data, the reason that the client was referred to you, a summary of significant data, which is pretty handy for a lot of people who just want to see, they want the background leading up to the case. And then your psychosocial self-report, which in my experience usually is probably the bulk. Certainly it's the biggest section of your report. The ninth section on the report is a review of records that you've collected about the client and about what's going on. The 10th section is collateral information, including your interviews with other people besides the client. And then it looks like we have a typo here. I've got two number 10s, but personality assessment and test results. So here's where you go into all of your different tests that you administered and what those tests told you. Your mental status exam and evaluation, your diagnoses, your summary, conclusion, and recommendations. So that's the bird's eye viewpoint. Now we're going to take it section by section, and with each one of these sections, we're going to show you the actual official sample report from the MBFE, which was a result of several of the committee chairs putting their heads together and really hammering out a report that we think is sort of a gold standard for you to use. Before we get into that, just a few rules of thumb about the report. Let me make sure real quick that looks like we do have some questions, so let me address those real quickly here. Looks like somebody had lost sound. Alan had lost sound at 3:08. So I'm just going to type a message in here to him to see if that's still a problem or not. Oh, he said I exited and came back, so it looks like he's good. Krista, you said we are not supposed to see anything on our screen. Can everyone else see things on their screen right now? You can see my slides as I go through here. Somebody type into the either the questions or comments box. Angela says she cannot see slides. Tracy can't see them. Christine can't see them. Okay, well, we have problems then. So let me fix that. Here's what I'm going to try and do. Norm, are you on right now?
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's because I clicked on the actual report. Maybe I interfered with your process. I'll stay out of it. See if that clears it up.
Okay, well, right now, what can you see on your screen, Norm? Can you see like my internet browser with a slide that says presenters, info, report sections, format, and so forth?
No, I can't see anything you're presenting.
Ah, okay. So we do have an issue here. I've had this happen once before, and I think that probably the reason we're having this problem may be because both you and I are logged in. Oh, change presenter. Let's try that. Ah, okay. I think the problem was that I had you set up as presenter.
Okay, so put your down. Yeah, let's see. Maybe
So I think I just fixed it. Hopefully, starting right now, everybody can see my screen.
Okay, good, good.
So go ahead and type in.
There it is.
All right, so everybody sees my screen now? All right, looks like everybody can now. Great. And so now hopefully you see in front of you a slide that says a few rules of thumb. Everybody sees that? Okay, perfect. So sorry about that. We always have one glitch. It seems like every time that we do a webinar. I think that one was because both Norm and I are logged in as the same person right now, and so the system got confused about who's supposed to be showing their screen and who's not. Okay, so a few rules of thumb about these reports. The first thing is to be succinct. And you want to think the way that you thought in grad school when you probably, if you're like me and most counselors, you were required to write in an APA format. An APA format is not exactly thrilling, richly worded reading. It's very succinct and in some ways kind of technical. You try to capture the most amount of information in the least number of words when you're writing in an APA style. So you do not want to have big, lengthy, superfluous, richly worded sort of descriptions of things when you're writing a forensic report. You want to avoid overly lengthy paragraphs, which is something that I certainly at least used to be guilty of. I would have these paragraphs that would go on and on and on, and one thing when I was preparing for the oral exam that my mentor told me to do was to start taking those paragraphs and find ways to chunk them down to be shorter paragraphs, so it's a lot easier on the eyes and and for the person reviewing the report. The third thing is to be very objective. You're reporting facts. You don't start talking about your opinion, your way of conceptualizing things really, until you reach the conclusion section of your report. Up until then, it's facts and data, information. You don't say something like,
One interjection, Aaron.
Sure.
I think you have it's not the conclusion, it's the summary.
Oh yes,
the
you're right.
subjective part.
I do have a, I do need to clarify that. Your summary, which is your dynamic formulation, is also opinionated. Your conclusion is also opinion, but it flows from that summary, that dynamic formulation. So actually both of those sections are going to be subjective, but particularly the summary section, so I do need to change this slide. Now we used to say, and we still technically do, that you can use a fictitious case for your report when you're preparing for the oral exam, a sort of hypothetical case, but I would not recommend it. And the reason I wouldn't recommend it is that if you create a fictitious case and you write a report off of that, and then you actually get to your oral exam and you have the oral examination committee asking you questions that are challenging questions, if you made it up as you went along, you might be inconsistent because you're manufacturing that additional information. So you might actually find yourself contradicting yourself or trying to struggle to make things up as you go along, which to me sounds very stressful and very difficult. I would recommend that you use a real case that you know very well. Now you could, in some scenarios, if you're going to use a case but it's not going to be a forensic evaluation, you could consider as an alternative maybe using a therapy client and then creating a fictitious forensic evaluation because you know that client really well and could probably do that and answer questions. That might be a substitute if you haven't done a forensic evaluation yet, but I would recommend using a real case so that you don't contradict yourself, and make sure it's a case that you're really familiar with. And remember that when you're writing the report, your audience isn't some kind of clinical supervision team or something. You're writing a report for a court, for judges and attorneys, not necessarily for other clinicians or mental health professionals. Now that doesn't mean that you won't be using some clinical terms, but you want to try and keep that to a minimum, and you want to try as much as possible to explain things in a way that would make sense to judges and lawyers. So we'll give you some examples as we go through here. You want to proofread your report, and I recommend showing it to a trusted person to look for any errors that you might have missed. A lot of times when we're reviewing our own reports, we see what we intended and not what we actually wrote. So we miss out on grammatical errors and typos and those sorts of things. I mean, I proofread this slide show that you're seeing, but I've already seen a couple errors in it as I'm reading it and presenting it to you that I couldn't seem to catch when I went through it the first time, so that would be a good example. Looks like we got another question here. This one's from Patricia. Patricia asks, what type of report should we use? Would a GAL report suffice? Well, Patricia, I'm not sure what a GAL report is, first off, but if you would like, I could unmute you so that you can explain that to me and I can try and better respond to you. Would that be okay with you? Let me just go in here. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. I think it'll ask you if you'd like to be unmuted. So Patricia, are you there? Can you expound on what a GAL report is? Oh, here we go. She has typed in guardian ad litem. Okay. I don't know what a guardian ad litem report looks like, but I don't think a guardian ad litem report would be a forensic evaluation, a forensic mental health evaluation at all. I would think that would be something entirely different. You will see as we go through the sample report what it is that we expect from you. So let's kind of hold on to that question until we get into the actual report, and then if you still are a little bit confused about it, let me know, but I think we're going to be answering that as we go through the format here. Okay, so let me go back to the slides. So what you missed earlier when I was giving you the bird's eye view and you couldn't see my screen, you missed this, which is the outline for the sample report. I kind of verbally walked you through these before you could see the screen, but I would assume a guardian ad litem report would not look anything like would not contain the kinds of information that you see in front of you right now. We want you to be writing a report from the perspective of a forensic mental health evaluator. Somebody who's not a guardian ad litem, but who has been either appointed by the court to evaluate a client or has been hired by an attorney to evaluate a client, and that report may be used in court. Okay, looks like we got another question from a couple questions here. One is from John. You could use data from a guardian ad litem report to formulate your case you're evaluating, and that does make sense to me. I think you could do that. Alan has asked the question, will you put the PowerPoint on the Dropbox? Alan, where you're going to see the PowerPoint will be in the CFMHE candidate training folder, which, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, if you do not have the link and password to that, then send me an email and I'll reply with that information, and we'll get that to you. But yes, I will be making everything that you see on your screen available, as well as a recording of today's webinar. So you'll have both the PDF of all the slides and the recording. And Johanna was asking the same question, so it looks like we've answered that. John, you were asking, where is that sample report on the website again, please? It's not actually on the website. It's again on that CFMHE training, candidate trainings folder. In fact, I'll show you that because now you can see my screen. Can everybody see on my screen right now where it says CFMHE candidate training materials? Hopefully you can see that. Okay, great. Looks like you guys can see it. Now, it will look different to you because what you're going to do is you're going to go online to box.com and then you're going to enter in the password that I'm going to give you if you don't already have it. But it's going to have these same files in it that you see on the screen. So I'll run through these. Here's a copy of the application to become an MBFE. That's the CFMHE electronic application. The credentialing manual is for people who have applied to be a CFMHE and have paid the certification fee. It's supplemental information for the kind of information that we provide for those of you who attend that 8-hour workshop that we provide in Florida and at the AMCA conference. It's got a lot of information that helps you to prep, and background information on the MBFE and on the certification process as well. We have a couple things on here that I just threw in there I thought you'd find helpful: cross-examination questions and do's and don'ts of expert testimony. You won't necessarily need either of those files for, say, the written exam. Could come in a little bit helpful for the oral examination, in the sense that you sort of act or behave as though you are an expert witness in court when you're doing that oral exam. We'll get to that later. The next file you see is link to exam prep YouTube video. That's just a link to be able to go in and watch or view a previous webinar that we did on exam prep. The problem is, when you watch that video, a few things have changed because it's a little outdated, so I may actually be removing this soon. And I'll probably replace it with a recording of today's webinar on the oral exam and a recording of next week's webinar on the written exam that Dr. Hoffman's going to be presenting. Then you see MBFE workshop handouts. Those are the handouts that we give out for the 8-hour training that we provide at the FOMCA annual conference and the AMCA annual conference. Then you have oral exam prep presentation slides. I'm going to be replacing that file this afternoon with the updated version of what you're seeing on the screen right now. And then you see oral study guide revised. That's a separate document that we have that helps people prepare for the oral exam. The written examination preparation slides and the written exam study guide. All those resources are available to you. Looks like we got a couple other questions, but it looks like we already addressed those, so we should be good. Okay, so now getting back to these slides here, we covered our rules of thumb when you're preparing a report. Now let's start going into the nitty-gritty details of a report and what it should look like section by section. So the first thing we'll look at here, I'm going to be pulling up here the actual report. The first thing that you do is you provide a title on the top of your report for the type of evaluation you're doing. Now, that title, oops, let me get rid of this real quick here. Hold on just a second. There we go. That's better. So hopefully you can now see the official sample report on here, a case of a client named Greg Rhodes. Now this is a real case, but of course we modified everything. Dates and ages and names of people and agencies and places and everything, so there'd be nothing identifying in this report. But at the top here you see it says your professional heading. For mine, for example, I operate under the counseling practice name Integrity Counseling. So Integrity Counseling's logo appears at the top of my report. I also have the logo of the NBFE CFMHE logo on my report, which once you're a CFMHE, you can sign a document which gives you the opportunity to use that logo on your reports. Then there's a title, Forensic Mental Health Evaluation. So that's the title that we're talking about here. Now next you go into your header, which contains the name of your client, the date of birth, the age of your client, the date of the evaluation, the interview dates, which are the dates that you actually interviewed the client, and your case number. So when we go to the sample report here, you'll see here's the client's name, Greg Rhodes, date of birth, age, date of the evaluation, and the interview dates, including the length of those interviews. So this is a client that I interviewed for 5.5 hours on 2 separate dates. And then I just kind of X'd out the case number here. So far everything's pretty cut and dried. Then we go into our list of sources, which includes the tests that you administered, any structured interviews that you used, clinical interviews including length of time, and review of records. See that we have a, I think we have a chat comment here. Okay, so Norm, I got your message. I will address that one later. That's no problem. Okay, so we have our list of sources like I was saying, and if we go to the sample report here, what you will see is I actually used a questionnaire called the Biopsychosocial History Questionnaire that I administered. I did a clinical interview with the client, Mr. Rhodes, for 5 hours. I used the DSM-5 Level 1 Cross-Cutting Symptom Measure adult version as a screening tool to kind of give me a heads up on some areas to explore for looking at the possibility of a mental health disorder. And you can almost see from some of the tests I did here what kind of evaluation this is. But I did use the Maryland Addiction Questionnaire, the Mini International Neuropsychiatric Interview, which is a structured interview to help formulate a diagnosis. The Personality Assessment Inventory was administered, the Substance Abuse Subtle Screening Inventory 3, a symptoms checklist. I did a urinalysis drug test. And then I list, these are the records that I reviewed and factored into my evaluation. The court order, treatment records from previous treatment experience, criminal history from the sheriff's office, and treatment records from the client's primary care physician. All right, so any questions on what you've seen so far? It's pretty cut and dried, but feel free to ask something if you have a question. All right, don't see any, so we'll move on here. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to list identifying data and then start describing the, and then indicate why it is that we're doing this evaluation. So again, going to our sample here. Oh, I forgot to talk about the list of collateral sources. So these are the people who I interviewed besides the client. I interviewed his fiance. I interviewed his attorney, or actually I think this was actually his ex-girlfriend's attorney who I interviewed. And then I interviewed the clinical social worker who provided treatment for the client in the past. After reviewing her records, I spoke to her on the phone. All right, looks like we have a question. Johanna, do you typically use at least this many assessment tools? My answer is not necessarily. It depends. The reason I use this many tools in this case is because it was a very broad evaluation, or very broad reason for the evaluation, which we'll get to in a minute. So I'll explain that further when we get to it. But in some cases, in many forensic evaluations, you're going to be asked to a very limited, specific number of questions, and so you may not use as many tools. Let's say that you're going to do a competency evaluation, for example. If you were doing that, you probably wouldn't need as many tools as what I just showed you. You could, if the case is really, if it's a really complex case, but in many cases, you're probably not going to have that number of tools. Because my question was so broad that I was asked to answer, I'm going to be using more tools. Now, some of us, I'm one of them, will err on the side of using more than not enough. One thing for me, for example, I do not like using only one test for one issue or area that I'm exploring. So let's say I'm asked to determine if somebody has a personality disorder. I'm not going to use just one test probably. I might do 2 tests in some cases. I just don't like to use only, you'll see with substance abuse, I use the SASE-3, but I also supplement it with the Maryland Addiction Questionnaire. I'll talk about why I did that in this case when we get to it. So it depends. Okay, so identifying data. Mr. Rhodes is a 33-year-old Caucasian male residing with his fiancée and her children at their residence in Largo, Florida. So we're basically just saying this is who Mr. Rhodes is. I like to say, you know, how old the person is, their gender or sex, their race or ethnicity, and where they hail from, so to speak. And then the reason for referral, this is where we're going to go into why am I even seeing this person? Why am I doing a forensic evaluation? Who ordered it? And what am I being asked to do with this? So I say Mr. Rhodes was referred for a forensic mental health and substance abuse evaluation by the Honorable Judge Felix Fairview, who presides over a child custody case involving Mr. Rhodes and his ex-girlfriend, Hannah Pierce. Now already, this is an unusual case in some respects, because although this evaluation is connected to a child custody case, I'm not doing a parenting or custody evaluation, as you'll see in a moment. I'm kind of surprised that the judge actually ordered things the way that the judge did in this case, but yeah, it's the judge's call. Both Mr. Rhodes and Ms. Pierce's attorney, so Ms. Pierce is the ex-girlfriend, I cost a lot, clarified that Judge Fairview did not order a parenting evaluation. Rather, the purpose of the evaluation is twofold. 1, determine if Mr. Rhodes meets diagnostic criteria for any mental health or substance use disorders. 2, identify what, if any, treatment recommendations are appropriate. So again, going back to that question of do you usually use this many tests, in a case like this I do, because it's a very broad question. Are there any mental health or substance use disorders? So I want to use tests that really help me to get to that. And that's a very broad spectrum. And then 2, what treatment recommendations might be appropriate. So I'm actually doing sort of a glorified or expanded clinical evaluation. It's connected to a court case. Essentially, as you're going to see in a moment, the ex-girlfriend was saying, my ex is crazy and shouldn't have any custody or visitation rights for our son. And so the judge wanted to find out if that was true or not. That's a way to paraphrase kind of what's going on here. So both Mr. Rhodes and Mr. Lott verbalized an understanding that no opinion will be offered as to Mr. Rhodes' parenting abilities incidental to this evaluation. Now, why did I throw that in there? I threw it in to be extra sure that I'm clarifying that, look, I was asked just to answer those two questions. I know this is a custody case, but I'm not going to be able to offer any opinions on who's the better parent or who should or shouldn't have custody, because that's not what I was asked to do. So I'm really clarifying that in that statement. And then we added the limits of confidentiality were explained to Mr. Rhodes. He indicated that he understood them, and he signed a consent of evaluation form. So here we're just kind of covering our bases and documenting that we were abiding by our ethical obligations of really explaining what's going on here with this evaluation, what it is and isn't. It's not therapy. I'm not your counselor. I'm an evaluator. I'm here to offer an opinion to the court. The things that you discuss with me will likely end up in court, and there are potential ramifications for that and so forth. So we put that line in there to sort of cover that base and document that we're providing that information. So back to our slides here, we get past the identifying data, and then we get into the reason for the, past the reason for referral and into the summary of significant data. So here we're providing the background. Yeah, we get it. We know why it is that the judge ordered this evaluation, but what's the history of this case? That what even brought these folks in front of the judge to begin with? That's kind of what we're getting at with the summary of significant data. So what I say here is Mr. Rhodes reported that he has not yet met his son Brett, who was born on September 21st, 2012. Stating that his ex-girlfriend, Hannah Pierce, is Brett's mother, and her attorney requested that the judge order the evaluation. He stated that his objective is to obtain co-parenting privileges, but Ms. Pierce has voiced concern about his stability as a parent in terms of alcohol consumption and anger. He explained that he and Ms. Pierce had a very tumultuous and strained relationship for 2.5 years, and they did not part on good terms, i.e., we split up in a bad way and she's pretty bothered by it. Now, a couple of things I want to point out here. One of them is that notice that although I'm giving you facts here and not opinions. And the reason they're facts instead of opinions is I didn't say Mr. Rhodes hasn't met his son yet. His ex-girlfriend asked her attorney to order the evaluation. I didn't say that. It may sound like what I said, but I used words like he reported that, stating that, he explained that, he stated. Those are facts. I can attest to that this is what this guy is telling me or told me, but he could be telling me the truth or not. So even when we're reporting people's self-report, we're using verbiage that makes it objective because we're making it clear that I'm not saying these are facts. I'm saying that this is what the person said are the facts. So I am giving you facts that this is what the person said. So hopefully that makes sense. You want to be very careful about using claims or reports of clients and stating them as facts instead of as statements of your client. Now, I threw in that we split up in a bad way and she's pretty bothered by it. I think it's good periodically to throw in direct quotes of clients because sometimes when we're summarizing a client's perspective or statement that could be really important, opposing counsel could really raise the question of, is this really what the client said or not? So you'll see at various points in the evaluation, when I think it's really important to do it, I will use direct quotes from clients, but of course use them sparingly. So now we're going to get into the psychosocial self-report, which is on our next slide here. There we go. So what we've done is we've broken the psychosocial self-report up into several distinct and separate subheadings. The first one is family or developmental history. Now we use the verbiage psychosocial self-report because we're saying this is what the client tells us about their history. It's a self-report. These aren't necessarily facts. The client certainly could be falsifying or skewing information or screening out what they do and do not report, but we're saying this is their self-report when we explore this kind of information with them. So in the family or developmental history, we talk about where they were born. When they were born, were there any pregnancy or birth complications, developmental delays, descriptions of their childhood, their siblings and birth order, descriptions of childhood relationships with members of the household or family, and of the parents' relationship with each other when the client was growing up, including history of divorce, separation, and remarriage, childhood history of abuse or trauma, the nature and quality of relationships with family members in the present can also go into this history. Now, all these things can be relevant, especially in a case like this, where I'm answering a very broad question about a client's possibility of mental disorders and treatment needs. I see we have a question here from Johanna. What if the client doesn't know their birth or other information? Then I would say that the client doesn't know it, that the client reported to me that they aren't aware, for example, of where they were born, or that the client reported that they were not aware of what their birth order is in the family. So I would say that, and then if I had some collateral resources that could answer those questions, then I'll talk about those as well in the report. Because maybe the client doesn't know where he was born, but I've got some other document or information or something that does tell me that. So I could do that. For me, I'm usually working with clients who know all this stuff, or at least they know a lot of it. It's not uncommon for me to hear a client say, I don't know if there were any pregnancy or birth complications. That's a normal thing for people to not know, but most of my clients even know that. They can tell me about that. Some do not. Also, they may not remember things like whether there were any developmental delays, but again, most of my clients know that stuff. So hopefully that answers your question, Johanna. So let's go into what I actually said in the report here. Mr. Rhodes reported that he was born and raised in Pinellas County, Florida. To the best of his awareness, his mother was in good health during her pregnancy with him. He was born without complications and there was no developmental delays during childhood. So notice I said to the best of his awareness. He told me, I'm not aware of any delays or complications. I don't think there were any developmental delays during childhood. He doesn't necessarily know for sure, but he's reporting his perception, the best of his awareness. He described his childhood as close to my brother mostly, adding that his family, and that was interesting, when I asked him to describe his childhood, he said, I was close to my brother mostly, which kind of infers to me that he may not have been as close to other people in his family, adding that his family was a large crew and there was always something going on. He reported a fun and good relationship with both biological parents. He described their relationship with each other as not together, adding that his biological parents divorced when he was 3 years of age. Both parents subsequently remarried and reported that his relationship with both step-parents was fine. He has one older biological brother and 6 step-siblings. He described his relationship with all of his siblings as fine, adding that he's closest to his biological brother. He denied any forms of childhood abuse, neglect, or trauma. So then, the next section of the psychosocial self-report is medical history. Here you talk about current biomedical conditions or medical concerns, history of any significant medical problems, injuries, surgeries, or procedures, the description of their current health, current and past prescription medications, including dosages, reason for prescription, prescribing physicians, side effects, medication compliance issues, that sort of thing. What is their access to health care? Do they have insurance or not? Do they have a primary care physician? And what are their most recent physical examination and results, their fitness and exercise regimen, and their diet and nutrition? So remember, this is a psychosocial history, so we are covering all our bases, looking at the same important domains that you would look at if you were doing a clinical evaluation and you were doing a biopsychosocial assessment. It's sort of the same sort of stuff that you're looking at here. You're just looking at it in great detail. So what did I write in the report for medical history? Mr. Rhodes denied any current biomedical conditions, described his overall health as good, reports a history of ulcers approximately 2 years ago that were successfully treated. He does not currently have health insurance, denied any current prescription meds or history of significant medical procedures or surgeries, reported he doesn't exercise as much as he'd like, but visits the gym once a week and walks once a week. He stated he does not always eat as healthy as he would like to, but is fairly happy with his diet and not concerned about it because he's in good health. He reported that he eats 3 balanced meals a day and drinks plenty of fluids. Okay, so psychiatric history. And now we're moving outside of the realm of biomedical conditions and into mental health treatment. So what we're going to do here is we are going to start with their treatment history. Have they ever been diagnosed with conditions, and were they ever treated? What was the focus of that treatment, and who provided the treatment, and during what period of time were they being treated? What was the level of treatment? For example, was it outpatient? Was it inpatient, residential treatment, intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization? What were the treatment outcomes, and what are their treatment preferences? So I like to look at what do they like and not like about their treatment and those sorts of things when I'm looking at treatment preferences. So in this case, in our sample report, what did I say? I said Mr. Rhodes reported that he participated in weekly anger management sessions over a span of 26 weeks at 29 years of age. This treatment was court-ordered, incidental to a simple battery charge on May 19, 2010. When asked what the treatment was like for him, he stated he did not initially like it, but quickly grew to love all of it, reporting that he learned a lot about non-physical abuse, but did not care for some of the people who attended, but were fairly negative. He denied any other treatment history, including history of diagnosis or treatment for a mental health or substance use disorder. So pretty cut and dried, but anybody have any questions about this? Something I want to clarify here, got a message from Norm. We want to make it pretty clear that you do not want to deviate from this report format when you submit your sample reports. What we should see is that your report has the exact same headings that you see here and has the kind of information that you see here under each of those headings. So hopefully that clarifies things a little bit. Now just a quick tangent here because I forgot to mention it when we got things kicked off today. We are providing CEUs for today's webinar. We got approval for CEUs. In particular, if you're a Florida practitioner, those CEUs might come in handy because it's through the Florida board. But if you're in another state, your state, some states will accept CEUs that are recognized by other state boards, so there could still be some value in you getting those CEUs. Plus, the CEUs are also good for those of you who are NCCs, Nationally Certified Counselors, because we're an approved provider for the National Board of Certified Counselors. But here's the kicker. If you want CEUs or a CEU certificate, you must complete the post-webinar evaluation feedback form. You're going to see that form populate on your screen automatically at the end of our webinar today. Just stay on the screen, and a moment after I end things, within a few seconds anyway, you should see on your screen the evaluation form, and you have to complete that in order to get CEUs. Now let's say that for some reason you miss it or it doesn't populate on your screen, which never happens, but let's say it does happen. I have also included a link to that evaluation form in an email that you will receive about 1 hour after today's webinar concludes. That email includes a link to the evaluation form, but please complete it today because CE Broker now wants us to report CEUs within 24 hours. So make sure you complete that evaluation form. And if you want CEUs, pay close attention to the last 2 questions on the evaluation form because they ask you to enter in your license information, your license number, and so forth. We won't be able to give you CEUs if you don't enter that. Looks like we got a question here. Johanna says, I'm in New York, will I get CEUs? So the answer to that is maybe. Our CEUs are approved by our state board here in Florida, where we're actually broadcasting from right now, and where the headquarters of NBFE is. You will have to check with your board in New York to see if they will accept CEUs that are recognized by our board here in Florida. Now, again, if you are a nationally certified counselor, then these can be used for CEUs towards maintaining your NCC or any related certificates provided by the MBCC. So hopefully that answers that question. We don't know for sure if New York will accept your CEUs from this webinar. Hopefully they will. What I've heard from people is that they tend to recognize, states tend to recognize CEUs that are recognized by other state boards, but I don't know for sure. Okay, so getting back to the slides here, now we're going to move into substance use and abuse history. Now, in this particular case, it's an extremely lengthy section. Why? Because a big part of the concern of the fiance, the mother of the child, is this guy's got a problem with alcohol, she asserts. And sure enough, he does have a very significant substance use history, so you see a very lengthy section, much more so than you might see in a lot of other evaluations. So when you're talking about substance use history, you want to include the ages or dates of use, the different substances that were used, the quantity and frequency of use. So how much are they using and how frequently are they using it? The circumstances of use. What are the kinds of conditions under which they use? And then finally, any DSM symptoms of a substance use disorder. So let's go to the report and see what I said. Mr. Rhodes reported that he first drank alcohol at 15 years of age. Oh, also a side note, Dr. Hoffman just sent me a message saying NBCC, the National Board of Certified Counselors, is generally accepted by most states in spite of being an NCC. So apparently a lot of state boards for your license will see from our certificate, oh, it's approved by NBCC, we'll accept those. So hopefully that'll be the case for you, Johanna, in New York there. Okay, so back to the report here. Mr. Rhodes reported that he first drank alcohol at 15 years of age and most recently drank Saturday night, 1 week prior to the interview date, which was September 12th. He admitted that from 15 to 17 years of age, he drank approximately once every few months, if that. And I'll save you the other details here. You can read them in greater detail on your own if you'd like, but I walk you all the way through this guy's use history up to the present day. In pretty good detail because I knew that was a major focus of this evaluation and I'd have to spend a lot of time on it. Notice also that I've got a header on each page marking it as confidential, providing page numbers and the client's name and date of birth. And I recommend you do the same on your reports. Things get shuffled around sometimes when judges and attorneys are looking at things, and so I think it's helpful to refer to page numbers and have labeled page numbers. I would be shocked if somebody didn't provide that information. Okay, so then I go into, look, he actually endorsed these 4 symptoms, these 4 DSM symptoms of an alcohol use disorder during the clinical interview. Now I add a note here that in this case I think is pretty relevant. Mr. Rhodes' self-report that he last consumed alcohol 1 week prior to the evaluation was contradicted by his urinalysis results, suggesting alcohol consumption within 72 hours prior to the evaluation, and by a collateral interview with his fiancée, who reported that he's been drinking nearly every day for the past month. So I'm basically saying, look, even though the client said this above, we have reason to doubt that that's true. And then I go into his tobacco, the symptoms of a tobacco use disorder. Now, I was actually asked during my oral, because this is the same case that I used for my oral examination when I was applying to become a CFMHE. And I was actually asked, why'd you throw in the tobacco stuff? How's that relevant? And my answer was, well, because I was asked to determine if he has any mental health or substance use disorders, and if so, what treatment would be relevant. Tobacco use disorder is obviously a substance-related disorder, and even though some people minimize it, I think it's very significant. Tobacco is the #1 cause of preventable death in our country. I was asked to do a thorough substance abuse evaluation. Why would I ignore a highly addictive substance? That doesn't make sense. So I'm answering the referral question basically by including information about tobacco. Even though someone might say, well, yeah, but that doesn't have anything to do with his parenting abilities. Somebody can make that case, but remember, I'm answering those two questions that the court wanted me to answer in the most honest and efficient way that I can. Okay, so let's go into academic and vocational history stuff, going back to our slides here. Academic history. Their history of graduation from high school, college, and or trade or vocational school, including years of graduation. Their highest level of education completed, their majors or concentrations of their education, description of performance as a student, including grades or GPA, their level of interest in school, that sort of thing. And then vocational history, what is their employment history, including military? I think that's very significant in many cases. Their trade or their career path, their gaps in employment history and explanations for those gaps. That can be rich information sometimes. Their current job status and the disposition of their previous jobs. I mean, who knows if you're doing a substance-related evaluation, which really when I do forensic evaluations, 9 out of 10 times it's a substance abuse evaluation because that's my area of expertise. We're going to get in gaps in employment history, we often find that somebody was terminated because of something related to their substance use. So let's go back to the report and see the way this looked when I reported on it. Report school was great growing up, grades were average. After graduating in '98, he attended and graduated from an automotive mechanic certificate program at a local trade school in 2006. Vocational history. He worked in 4 employment positions in the auto repair industry, having worked as a mechanic and service manager, denied significant gaps in his employment history. This is interesting. He was terminated from a position with a car dealership in September 2012 because of too many absences from my child custody case, and was laid off from a second position in a Jeep sales company in October 2013 because the company filed for bankruptcy. Currently self-employed, working as an auto repair tech, denied any history of service in the military. Okay, now then the financial history, what I like to talk about there is their annual income and their sources of income, history of bankruptcy, debt, ability or inability to pay bills, financial struggles, etc. Moving into the legal history, the history of arrests, dates, charges, circumstances, and dispositions, their current legal status or probation status. For sake of time purposes, because believe it or not, we already are down to having 30 minutes left, I'm not going to read word for word everything in these sections, but I'll read the things that I think are really relevant. I talked about the charges that he had in the past. I specifically mentioned that, during the interview, or in the biopsychosocial questionnaire that he completed, he only reported 1 arrest, and it was like a minor deal. But during the clinical interview, suddenly he's talking about all these other arrests, which are a bigger deal than the one thing that he reported back at age 18 and the paperwork. So this is a guy who's withholding information when he completes the paperwork, but as he gets comfortable with me in the interview, he's telling me about more stuff that went on. And he significantly minimized what happened with one of these charges. I say when Mr. Rhodes discussed the simple battery charge, he reported that he pushed a door open and that his girlfriend's friend happened to be behind it, causing her to be knocked down by the door. However, this self-report was contradicted by collateral records indicating that on the night in question, he both pushed his girlfriend to the ground and pushed his girlfriend's friend, resulting in 2 charges, one for simple battery and one for domestic battery. So you're kind of getting a pattern of a guy who's minimizing some stuff, right? He's minimizing how recently he drank and how often he drinks. He's minimizing what happened with these past events. He actually told I actually got a copy of his preliminary assessment from his previous treatment episode for anger management, and he admitted to a lot more in that interview than he did in the interview with me, because remember, a child custody case, in child custody cases, clients are highly motivated to engage in what we call positive impression management. What does that mean? That basically means I'm trying to make myself look wonderful. So I'm going to minimize things. I'm going to underreport. I'm going to leave some details out that could cast me in a negative light. That's very common when you are dealing with cases that are connected to child custody. Now compare that with, say, let's say a lawsuit alleging that somebody's been traumatized by somebody else's actions. In that case, they're going to be likely to engage in negative impression management. I want you to believe that I'm an absolute mess because this is a liability case and I'm trying to get money. Looks like we got a question here from Johanna. What was that term you used? Are we underreporting or minimizing? You might be talking about the term positive impression management. And that would be, I'm trying to make myself look better than the actual clinical picture would warrant. Whereas negative impression management is, I'm trying to make myself look worse than the actual clinical picture would warrant. For example, a disability evaluation that I did. A client was strongly engaging in negative impression management. He wanted me to believe that everything was absolutely terrible, horrible, and awful about him and he couldn't do anything. When the evidence pointed to the contrary, because he really wanted to get disability. He doesn't really like working very much. So when you're doing a test like the personality assessment inventory, they provide scales for positive impression management and negative impression management. And a plug here that we have that testing and assessment series. You will learn all about how to test for things like malingering and exaggerating or feigning symptoms and those sorts of things if you decide to participate in that very valuable training with Dr. Tommy Black. Okay, so talk about this guy's relationship history and all that stuff. Let's start talking about the review of records. So what I recommend that you talk about when you look at review of records is the type of record that you reviewed, who provided the record or authored the record, and the summary of pertinent information. You're not going to say stuff that has no relevance to your evaluation. You're only going to report what looks relevant to your evaluation. So this guy's past treatment for his previous arrest involving his ex-girlfriend to me was relevant, especially because there were contradictions between this record and his statements in the clinical interview. Also, from his primary care physician's records, I found a reference to the alcohol-related ulcers and a recommendation that he abstain from alcohol. That's really relevant in this case because this guy continued to drink despite the ulcers and the advisement of his primary care physician to stop drinking. The interview with his current fiancée, because she was able to tell me, actually he drinks a lot, but I think he gets along well with everybody in the household. And she at first was kind of minimizing his drinking just like he was. I talked to his previous therapist from the anger management, so she told me what she knew about his treatment, his response to treatment in the past. And then now we go into our personality assessment and test results. So you provide a description of the testing environment. So where did you administer these tests? Because you want to be able to show that you're adhering to the manuals of these tests. by administering them in the appropriate environment. What are the qualifications of any evaluators or interpreters that were involved with the testing protocol, the names and descriptions of tests, and your key results. One mistake I used to make is I would sit there and list every scale from the test and what their T-score was and what that T-score corresponded to. That's a bad idea for a forensic evaluation. Just talk about what was relevant from that test. Less is more in some situations when you're summarizing these tests. No judge or attorney wants to flip through 5 pages of some spreadsheet on T-score ranges that don't really tell you anything necessarily. They want the bottom line with these tests. So let me show you what I did. I wrote, first of all, I did a urinalysis test, and that actually did involve someone else interpreting results. So I had to document that information in good detail and what their qualifications were and that sort of thing. Notice this paragraph, all testing, ooh, look at that, a typo that we have to fix. All testing was conducted in the course of this, oh, I'm sorry, no, it's not a typo, good. All testing conducted in the course of this evaluation was conducted in an isolated office environment at the evaluator's practice. All testing was conducted with strict adherence to testing protocols and procedures. Tests were administered and interpreted by the evaluator, who is a qualified administrator for each level of testing. So I'm saying I'm qualified to administer and interpret these tests. With each test, I provide it in bold point and italicized. I gave a brief description of what that test is designed to do, which I get straight from the manufacturer of the test. And then I talk about only what was relevant from the client's test results. This guy's SASE 3 results suggested an extremely high level of defensiveness, elevated to a level sufficient to invalidate other aspects of the test profile. Now, every test showed the same thing. Every test said this guy's underreporting, he's minimizing, his results are invalid, he's trying to convince us that he's the first perfect person. So that's basically what I'm saying with these tests, and you can read them in greater detail later if you'd like. In fact, I'd encourage you to do that. And finally, mental status evaluation we'll get to. Now, this is one of the most commonly messed up sections of the report, because a lot of people either haven't been trained on how to do this or how to type it up, or they don't cover all their bases with it. So we tried to make you bulletproof by telling you everything that we expect to see in this section. Their speech and presentation, their dress and decorum, in other words, their mood and affect, and whether that's congruent, their orientation to time, place, person, and situation, their recent and remote memory, psychotic symptomatology, homicidal or suicidal ideation and risk assessment, judgment, insight, motivation for treatment. Okay, so what does it actually look like? Now, literally, what I think you should do, what I would recommend is when you write your report, take this and then just change all the details to match your client. But follow it like a flowchart. Mr. Rhodes' mood was euthymic, and his affect was appropriate to his mood. He was alert and oriented to time, place, person, situation. Both recent and remote memory were intact. He denied suicidal or homicidal urges, plans, or intentions. No indicators of psychotic symptomatology, including hallucinations, delusions, or perceptual disturbances. Now, this is important to pay attention to the difference between insight and judgment. Insight is, does this client get it? And judgment is, given what they get, are they choosing good behaviors or not? Are they choosing behaviors that would make sense and or be adaptive or healthy given their insight? So his insight, I think, is poor because he continued to drink despite his fiance's concerns, and he acknowledged a history of alcohol consumption exacerbating relationship distress with his ex-girlfriend. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong part. No wonder it's not making sense. His level of insight is poor as evidenced by a defensive posture in his responses. Remember all the data I provided from the tests about his defensiveness. Incongruities in his self-report. There are multiple contradictions where he's minimizing things. And his stated position that he has no concerns about his drinking despite acknowledgement of several negative consequences associated with his alcohol consumption. For example, the ulcers and he continued to drink, the relationship problems and he continued to drink, and so on. His judgment is poor as evidenced by his continued alcohol consumption despite his fiancée. So here I'm saying his judgment's also poor because he's choosing behaviors that are maladaptive. Motivation, although he reported a high level of motivation to complete the evaluation, he doesn't think he needs treatment. But when I talked to him about my treatment recommendations, he said, I know I can be real defensive, adding I don't really think I need it, but that he would participate if the court required him to for custody. So he's got a very limited level of motivation for treatment. It's mostly, I want my kid, so I guess I'll jump through your hoops more than anything else. So these are my diagnoses. Use DSM-5 and use ICD-10 codes instead of ICD-9 codes to be current. So we have a mild alcohol use disorder, moderate tobacco use, and then here's a Z code, which is other conditions that may be a focus of clinical attention even though they're not disorders. And then here's our medical history of stomach ulcers. Remember, no longer are there 5 axes with the DSM-5. So here we get into the summary. Here I start wrapping it all up. I walk you through this case and everything that's significant. And I talk about my dynamic formulation, what I believe about this case based on the data that I collected. So if we look at that a little bit here, I talk about Mr. Rhodes has historically relied on alcohol as a form of self-medication when experiencing emotional distress associated with relationships. However, this coping strategy appears self-defeating, exacerbating his distress. So here I give you my subjective opinion, my opinion based on the data that I collected. Now it flows nicely from the data, but it is still my conclusion, my opinion, my way of conceptualizing this case based on my experience and my knowledge base working with this client and as a mental health professional. So since I think that about this client, I conclude guy's got the disorder, and given his defensive response style and invalid test results, I could have missed a mental health disorder. I don't know for sure that he doesn't have a mental health disorder because I couldn't really get good quality information from him because of his defensiveness and his denial and invalid test results, and he's denying all the symptoms, but they could be there and I could have missed it, I'm saying. I then say, given his defensive response style and validation of test results, given that Mr. Rhodes is not yet in remission from his alcohol use disorder, it is this examiner's best clinical judgment, that's a good phrase to use, that he is in need of psychotherapeutic intervention to aid him in achieving and maintaining remission status with a secondary objective of ongoing assessment for the possibility of a co-occurring mental health disorder. Without such intervention, he is at risk of repeated problems managing his anger while under the influence of alcohol, posing a risk to himself and others. So you see there's a logical flow from my summary to my conclusion, and in turn there will be a logical flow from conclusion to recommendation. Summary, this guy drinks to cope and it doesn't work out so well for him. Conclusion, got an alcohol use disorder and needs treatment because without it blah 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 will happen. Recommendations, therefore I'm going to recommend treatment. Number 1, Mr. Rhodes should be referred for outpatient substance abuse treatment focused on relapse prevention skills, alternative coping skills for aversive emotional states, smoking cessation, because remember one of my diagnoses was a tobacco use disorder, and ongoing assessment for the possibility of a co-occurring mental health disorder. 2, and you want to list it in number format like this, and you want to be specific and don't get too lengthy with this stuff. He should maintain abstinence from alcohol and illicit substances while participating in treatment as evidenced by participation in random unannounced urinalysis drug tests. There's no good way to objectively measure whether he's still using or not without doing urinalysis testing. That's the gold standard in the substance abuse treatment arena. Now, I chose a case that matches my area of expertise. I know a lot about substance abuse treatment. You may want to choose a case that matches your expertise. Finally, to ensure continuity of care, this report should be shared with any mental health or substance abuse professional who works with him. I like throwing that in because this guy will go then to a treatment provider, do a psychosocial assessment as he starts his treatment and BS his way through it, just like he did with me. He'll minimize and underreport, and then the treatment provider won't provide adequate treatment. So that treatment provider needs to see this report to know what's really going on here, what the evidence at least demonstrates is probably going on here, so that they can match their treatment approach to the most accurate information that they can. Finally, respectfully submitted, I sign it, and I list my credentials underneath my name. Okay, so that is the sample report. Now, we do still want to throw in a few tips for the actual oral exam interview itself. But, in fact, I'll probably just hold off on questions for a few minutes so I can get through these. First thing is that these are the kinds of questions that you may be asked by the oral examiners. Now, remember, you submit report number 1 to Kathy, I think is it Kathy Langhorn? I believe is her name. In fact, I want to see. Let me see if she's actually on the webinar today. It does not look like it, but Howard Carroll is on the webinar today, and he heads the oral examination committee. So I'll let him chime in if there's anything he wants to add in a moment. But these are the questions. Oh, it's Kathy Lanthorn, sorry. Oh, also no more than 10 pages for the report. I got a comment here in our chat box about that. So remember, you want to limit yourself to 10 pages because the oral examiners don't need to be reading a 25-page report. Now, these are the questions the oral examiners may ask you. My opinion is the oral examiners, it's not like they're there to screw around with you and make you feel incompetent. They're not going to be dramatic. They're not going to be unreasonable. They're going to be critical in a constructive way. They're going to ask you questions that challenge you and see if you can justify or provide a logical or reasonable explanation for things connected to your report. That's a big part of what they're going to be doing. So relax and stay calm and stick with the information you have available and provide a reasonable, logical explanation for why you do what you do. So for example, one question I was asked in the oral exam was, see this question, why did you use the assessment tools that you used, basically? Okay, I was asked a variation of that question. I think it might have actually been asked by Howard, and the question was, why did you use the SASE and the Maryland Addiction Questionnaire instead of something like the MAST, the Michigan Alcohol Screening Test? Well, again, because I chose a client where the main focus of the evaluation was consistent with my specialty. I knew a lot on how to answer that question. I said, well, I don't like the Michigan Alcohol Screening Test. Number one, it doesn't have any validity scales. So if a client like this, who was being very defensive, we would have no way of measuring that with the MAST. Also, the MAST is not as updated with its norms, and the MAST is biased towards alcoholism. For example, if you answer it asks the question, have you ever been to an AA meeting? If you answer yes, that's an automatic 5 points, which meets the minimum for alcoholic. Well, problem is, what if you went to that AA meeting because you were required to by your professor as a part of your grad school training for mental health counseling, which I was required to do? Or what if you work in a treatment center and you were driving somebody what if you have a friend that you went to support at their AA meeting because they were a little too nervous to go by themselves? There are all kinds of scenarios that it doesn't it just seems to be slanted to me. It's not a very good tool. It might be okay in a clinical situation where you have high reason to believe that your client is going to be accurately reporting, but terrible for forensic eval. So then I was able to explain the reason I use the SASE and the MAC, because they're normed, because they have validity scales, because they can detect defensiveness and inconsistencies, and so on. So these are the questions. If you take a look at these questions later, then when you're preparing for your oral exam, you want to see if you can come up with a good answer to each of these questions. And if you can do that, you're going to do great in the oral examination, provided that you also submitted a really good report that followed this outline and included the information that we provided for you here. Now we have about 9 minutes left in our webinar, so I want to make sure that I give you a little bit of time here for questions or comments. This is just information about me. Oh, and then my contact information. So remember, if you don't have access to that candidate training folder, send me an email and I'll give you the link and the password to get in. So what questions or comments do we have? Not seeing anything so far. Howard, is there anything that you want to chime in about as far as the oral committee goes? I can unmute you here. Anything that you'd like to add?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. Well, you did a good job. You covered a lot of important information there, so I think this is really going to be helpful to folks so we get to see some better quality samples come in. So, no, I don't have anything to add. Thank you, Aaron.
Well, thanks, Howard. Can I ask you a question? Do you have any sort of examples of maybe some mistakes or weaknesses in some of the oral exams that you've been involved with so far?
One of the things is just not proofreading them. They're coming, a lot of them will come with writing errors and tortured sentences and typos and things like that. The other thing is not following the headings or putting the wrong information under the right information into the wrong headings, whichever.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed today that the instructions on the family section of the psychosocial thing said to put the marriage thing in the family. You didn't do that, but they belong down in the marriage, the marital part.
Ah, okay.
But that isn't congruent there with the marital thing in the family.
Okay, so we actually may have a weakness in the sample report itself. So specifically what Howard's saying is that whereas I talked about the client's marital status under their family history, that I should have instead done that under maybe the social, let me go to the headings here. Under the social history?
No, there's a marital history in the outline.
I think we actually lumped marital history in with family, but let's look at the actual outline and see if that's the case. Because we have right here we can actually look at the outline itself, oral exam report outline, and see, but maybe it is a mistake. It looks like on here we have it under. Yeah, it might have been in that last revision that we removed that. Let's see, do we have description of parents? It doesn't show up at all. So what we'll probably need to do is clarify. I would suggest we do. Oh, here we have under social current or dating relationships and relationship history. And I think that includes their marital information. If we
Well,
look,
I don't agree with that it should be in the social history. A marriage is a little beyond a social relationship.
yeah, okay. So we may want to confer and see if we need to go in here and revise that. I would say for now, for those of you who are completing your, yeah, here I talk about his engagement to his fiancée and that sort of thing. But I would say then, based on what Howard just said, just remember that to go back to the family history, and that's where we'll put the marital history. Does that sound right, Harold or Howard?
Sure, that'll be fine, yeah.
Okay. All right, so good catch, and we'll have to fix that later. Now, I also see a question here. Let me click on my panel and bring back our questions. Let's see, questions. We got a couple questions from people that I want to make sure we get to. So we have the question, I was recently told that there are actually 2 forensic reports due. One is for review by the board, and then we write to a second one to present to the board for oral defense. Is this accurate? Yes. Your first sample report is going to be reviewed and critiqued. Your second report goes to the oral examination board. That one will not be critiqued until the actual oral exam. That's the one, that second one that you send is the one that you'll defend in the oral examination. Now, Dr. Hoffman, I believe that the first report goes to Kathy, and the second report, does it get sent to you, or does it get sent to Howard, or can you tell me about that, or clarify that? Norm, if you were still there, we're looking for clarification on where those 2 reports go. Do you know, Howard?
That's my understanding. We've changed things a bit, but yeah, it goes to your mentor, the first one, and then you do the second one all by yourself and submit that without any mentoring to me.
Okay, so the first report goes to Kathy Lanthorn, and the second one goes to Howard. All right. So then we also have the question, can the oral exam be conducted face-to-face as opposed to remotely? My assumption, and I'll ask Dr. Hoffman if he agrees, but I would assume probably not, because the actual oral exam folks are in different states. So it would be very hard for them to all come together in one state or location and physically meet in person with a candidate. So I think they need to be done remotely through webcam through the GoToMeeting platform. We also have the question, substance use particularly lends itself to underreporting. What to do if a client doesn't meet the criteria of a substance use disorder, especially via self-inventories, but experiences and opinions of others are strong? Do you err on the side of a recommendation or not if they don't meet the criteria of a substance use disorder? Well, what I do is I decide whether the evidence suggests that a symptom is met or not, based not only on the client's self-report, but also by my collaterals. So for example, let's say that my client, when I asked him, hey, has alcohol use ever caused or contributed to a medical or physical problem for you? And the client says, no, never. And they also answer accordingly when they do the written tests. But I've got that report from the primary care physician that documents the alcohol-related ulcers and the recommendation to abstain from alcohol. Well, I'm going to trust that report from the primary care physician over the client's self-report. I think that is reasonable and logical. So I will say that despite the client denying the symptom, the evidence available suggests that it is in fact met. And this is the collateral information that I use to come up with that. Now, if it was just I interviewed, say, the ex of this person, and they say, oh yeah, they're an absolute slosh. Well, I don't know if that would be enough for me. That's not going to be enough for me to determine that they meet a symptom. Because this person very biased and has a hidden or has a hidden motive, so to speak, and that's not objective enough for my purposes. So I look at the source and whether the source could reasonably be trusted and some of that stuff. And I'm not going to say they meet a symptom if they don't. So I'm going to go where the data leads me. I don't know if that helps answer the question or not. Aren't those the same report just after revision? Says Johanna. Aren't those the same report just after revision? I'm not sure what you mean with your question, Johanna. Maybe you could clarify by sending a follow-up question. Krista is asking, can you explain all the steps to certification? And Maria is asking, can you provide the contact information for Kathy? Okay, so that I can help out with. First, the question about the steps to certification. The steps are that you apply, you complete the application, and you submit your certification fee. You then you then need to take the written examination. So you then study for your written examination and then actually schedule your written examination and complete it. Once you've passed the written examination, now you could start working with Kathy Lanthorn, who is your mentor, who chairs the mentor committee. And she can work with you on that that first report that you create, which you then submit to her, and she critiques and reviews and provides you with feedback. You will also use the training materials that we're providing to help you with preparing for that report. After that report has been submitted and critiqued by your mentor, you then create a second report, which then goes to Howard Carroll, the committee chair for the oral examination, and he will then schedule your oral examination with you. And then once you've passed the oral examination, you are in. Okay, so Maria asked for the contact information for Kathy. So I'm going to pull up her contact information here. And while I'm doing that, Johanna has clarified her question. So I'll get to that in a second here too. And I know, folks, that we're out of time here, but give me just a moment longer and I'll go ahead and answer these two questions. It won't take long. Kathy's email address is Kathy, that's Kathy .lanthorncounseling@gmail.com. That is spelled L-A-N. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type it into the questions box so that you all can have it right here on your screen. Kathy.lanthorncounseling@gmail.com. And I've sent that to everybody. Okay, so Johanna asked, I was asking about the two reports. Are they completely different reports and clients? They are completely different clients. So you'll submit your first report based on one client, and then you'll submit a second report based on a second client. Now, Dr. Hoffman, is there anything that you want to throw in before we conclude things with today's webinar? I don't know if we lost you, if you're still there or not, but I don't actually see you or hear you. So, so I will assume then that we are good to go, and we'll conclude things from here. So remember, if you don't have the materials, send me an email and I'll send you the link and the password. I hope this was helpful in reducing some of your anxiety about the oral examination and preparing for it. If you follow this format and you prepare for those questions that the oral examiners will ask you, I think you'll do wonderful on the examination, and you'll be able to feel confident and secure when you're ready for it. I encourage you to really pursue the process quickly and not drag your feet too much on certification. I think some people, because they're kind of nervous about it, sort of put it off, but you'll do good if you follow these formats and prepare for those questions. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to send me an email. And remember, take that that feedback survey that'll populate on your screen in just a moment here. And I'll also be sending you all some certificates of attendance after you've completed those surveys. It's been a pleasure, and good luck with pursuing your certification. I'm looking forward to the email that has your name on it and says that you are now a certified forensic mental health evaluator. So have a good one. Enjoy your weekend.